Detective Miller wasn't your typical Hollywood hero. He wasn't tall, didn't have chiseled features, and his dark hair was perpetually disheveled, as if he'd just wrestled with a flock of crows. His superpower wasn't brute strength or dazzling deduction, but a weary persistence, a refusal to let go even when the trail went cold. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a depth of sadness, a reflection of the many unsolved cases that haunted his sleep. Each unsolved case was a ghost, whispering doubts and regrets into his ears during the long, lonely nights. He sat in his cramped office, the flickering fluorescent light casting long shadows on the overflowing files stacked precariously on his desk. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation, the aroma of a detective who spent more time chasing shadows than sleeping. Another case had gone cold that week, a young woman disappeared without a trace. The image of her smiling face, plastered on a missing person poster, was seared into his mind. He felt the familiar weight of failure settle upon him, heavy and suffocating. Suddenly, a knock on the door jolted him back to reality. It was Officer Davies, a fresh-faced rookie eager to prove himself. "Detective Miller," Davies announced, his voice brimming with nervous energy, "we have a situation at Abernathy Manor. Possible homicide." Miller sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Abernathy Manor. He knew the name. Richard Abernathy, a wealthy businessman known for his ruthless deals and even ruder demeanor. Another case, another tragedy. He hoped this one wouldn't join the ranks of his ghosts. He grabbed his worn leather jacket, the one that had seen countless crime scenes, and followed Davies out to the patrol car. As they sped through the city streets, the flashing lights reflecting in the puddles of a recent rain, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that this case was different. Something about Davies' nervousness, the way he kept glancing in the rearview mirror, suggested that this was more than just another murder. This one felt like it had secrets buried deep, secrets that would fight tooth and nail to stay hidden. Little did he know that a shattered watch, hidden beneath a velvet couch, would be the key to unlocking those secrets. Abernathy Manor loomed before them, a Gothic monstrosity of dark stone and shadowed gables. Rain slicked the cobblestone driveway, reflecting the harsh glare of the patrol car's headlights. It looked like the kind of place where secrets went to die. As they approached the front door, two uniformed officers stood guard, their faces grim. "What have we got, Johnson?" Miller asked, his voice low and gravelly. Officer Johnson, a burly man with a perpetually sweating brow, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Abernathy was found in his study, Detective. The door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. The housekeeper found him this morning." Miller frowned. Locked from the inside. That made things complicated. Suicide? Possible, but Abernathy didn't strike him as the type. He seemed too arrogant, too full of himself to take his own life. More likely, it was a meticulously planned murder. He stepped inside, the grand foyer swallowing him in its cavernous darkness. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the stained glass windows, creating an eerie, ethereal glow. The air was thick with the smell of old money and decay. Johnson led him down a long hallway, lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women in elaborate costumes. Abernathy's ancestors, no doubt. Each one seemed to stare accusingly at Miller, as if blaming him for intruding on their hallowed ground. Finally, they reached the study. The door was heavy oak, intricately carved with scenes of mythical beasts. A single uniformed officer stood guard outside. Johnson nodded to him, and he unlocked the door. Miller stepped inside, and the scene hit him like a punch to the gut. Richard Abernathy lay sprawled on the floor, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ornate ceiling. A single gunshot wound marred his chest. The room was opulent, filled with expensive furniture and rare books. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, littered with papers and a half-empty glass of amber liquid. Everything screamed wealth and power, except for the dead man lying on the floor. It was a jarring contrast, the ultimate symbol of mortality in a room dedicated to immortality. Miller knelt beside the body, his keen eyes scanning the scene. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture. Just a dead man in a locked room. This was going to be a long night. The lack of forced entry gnawed at Miller. A professional hit? Maybe. But those guys usually left a calling card, some subtle sign that they were there. This felt different, more personal. He needed to know who had the most to gain from Abernathy's death. "Johnson," he said, without taking his eyes off the body, "get me a list of Abernathy's closest associates, business partners, family, anyone who might have had a motive." Johnson nodded and hurried out of the room. Miller continued his examination of the scene. He noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the inside of the door lock. Too small to be from a crowbar or lockpick, but enough to suggest someone had tampered with it. He bagged it as evidence. Abernathy was dressed in an expensive silk robe, indicating he was likely at home for the night. The half-empty glass on the desk smelled of Scotch, Abernathy's favorite brand, according to Johnson. Had he been expecting someone? Or was he simply enjoying a nightcap alone? His gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the desk. It was Abernathy with a younger man, arm around each other, both smiling broadly. The younger man was strikingly handsome, with slick-back dark hair and a confident air. Miller recognized him instantly from the files he had briefly reviewed in his office: Victor Sinclair, Abernathy's business partner. Sinclair was known for his sharp business acumen and even sharper negotiating skills. He was Abernathy's protégé, the one he was grooming to take over the company. But rumors had circulated for years about a falling out between the two, whispers of a power struggle and a bitter rivalry. Could Sinclair have killed Abernathy to seize control of the company? It was a plausible motive. But Sinclair was a smart man, too smart to leave obvious evidence. And according to his initial statement, he had a solid alibi, a high-stakes poker game at the exclusive Crimson Club. Miller knew that alibis could be fabricated, witnesses could be swayed. He needed to verify Sinclair's story, to find any cracks in his seemingly impenetrable facade. He picked up the photograph, studying Sinclair's face. There was something about his eyes, a hint of darkness lurking beneath the surface, that made Miller uneasy. He had a feeling that Victor Sinclair was hiding something, and he was determined to find out what it was. "All right, Abernathy," Miller muttered to the dead man, "let's see what secrets you were keeping." The Crimson Club was everything Abernathy Manor wasn't: bright, ostentatious, and dripping with new money. The air buzzed with the clatter of chips, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional shout of triumph or groan of defeat. Miller, feeling out of place in his rumpled jacket, located the poker room, a velvet-draped sanctuary at the back of the club. Victor Sinclair sat at the head of the table, a stack of chips towering before him. He was even more striking in person, his dark hair perfectly coiffed, his suit impeccably tailored. He exuded an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He looked every bit the successful businessman, a man who knew how to play the game and win. Miller waited until a break in the game before approaching him. "Mr. Sinclair," he said, flashing his badge. "Detective Miller, Police Department. I'd like a word with you." Sinclair raised an eyebrow, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Detective," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I'm in the middle of something important." "Can't this wait?" "I'm afraid not, Mr. Sinclair. It concerns the death of Richard Abernathy." Sinclair's expression hardened, but he quickly regained his composure. "Richard is dead?" I had no idea." "What happened?" "We're investigating, Mr. Sinclair." "I understand you were here last night." "Yes, that's right. I was here all night, playing poker. As you can see," he gestured to his impressive chip stack, "it was a rather profitable evening. Several witnesses have confirmed your presence, Mr. Sinclair. But can you account for your whereabouts for the entire night? Did you leave the table at any point?" Sinclair hesitated for a moment, a barely perceptible pause. "No, detective. I was here the entire time. I wouldn't miss a hand." Miller studied him closely, searching for any sign of deception. Sinclair's eyes were steady, his voice calm and controlled. He was a master of deception, if he was indeed lying. "I'll need to speak with the other players, Mr. Sinclair, to confirm your story. And I'm sure you understand that we'll need to conduct a thorough investigation." "Of course, Detective. I have nothing to hide." I was shocked to hear about Richard. He was a good friend, a mentor. I'll cooperate in any way I can. As Miller turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sinclair was playing him, that every word was carefully calculated to mislead him. He had a solid alibi, yes, but Miller knew that alibis could be shattered, just like glass. And somewhere, hidden beneath the surface of Sinclair's carefully constructed facade, was the truth. He just needed to find it. Back at Abernathy Manor, the forensics team was swarming the study like worker ants, meticulously collecting every piece of evidence, no matter how small. Miller watched them, his mind still replaying his conversation with Sinclair. Something wasn't adding up. Sinclair's initial shock at Abernathy's death seemed genuine enough, but the way he quickly regained his composure, the almost practiced ease with which he answered Miller's questions, raised red flags. And there was that slight hesitation when asked if he'd left the poker table. A blink and you'll miss it moment, but Miller hadn't missed it. He also noticed Sinclair's hands. They were perfectly manicured, but Miller could have sworn he saw a faint tremor in his left hand when he mentioned Abernathy's name. And his pulse, visible in his neck, seemed to quicken slightly. These were subtle tells, the kind that only a seasoned detective would pick up on. He walked over to Sarah, a young, enthusiastic forensics specialist who was meticulously dusting the mahogany desk for fingerprints. Sarah was a rising star in the department, known for her sharp eye and unwavering attention to detail. "Anything interesting, Sarah?" Miller asked. Sarah looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "Possibly, Detective. I found some fibers on the rug that don't match anything in the room. They look like they could be from a wool coat, maybe a dark color." "Bag them," Miller instructed. "And check the fibers on Abernathy's robe. See if there's any transfer." Sarah nodded and carefully collected the fibers. "Also," she added, "I found some traces of mud on the soles of Abernathy's slippers. It's a different type of mud than what's outside on the driveway. It's more like garden soil." "Garden soil?" Miller frowned. Abernathy didn't strike him as the gardening type. "Check the grounds, Sarah. See if you can find where that mud came from." As Sarah continued her work, Miller wandered over to the fireplace, his gaze sweeping across the room. The locked door, the lack of forced entry, Sinclair's alibi, it all felt too neat, too perfect. He knew that the devil was in the details, and he was determined to find those details, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed. He just needed a break, a clue, something to point him in the right direction. He just didn't know that clue was hidden beneath the very couch he was now staring at. Sarah, ever the diligent investigator, was already outside, carefully examining the flower beds that lined the back of the manor. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. She crouched down, her gloved fingers sifting through the soil. "Detective," she called out, her voice tinged with excitement. "I found it. The mud on Abernathy's slippers matches this soil perfectly. And look," she pointed to a small patch of disturbed earth, "it looks like someone was digging here recently." Miller joined her, his eyes scanning the flower bed. The roses were meticulously pruned, but the disturbed earth stood out like a sore thumb. "What do you think they were digging for?" he asked. Sarah shrugged. "Could be anything. Maybe Abernathy buried something here. Or maybe someone was looking for something." "Check for footprints," Miller instructed. "And bag a sample of the soil. We'll need to analyze it." As Sarah collected the soil sample, Miller's gaze drifted towards the study window, which overlooked the flower bed. He pictured someone standing outside, peering into the study, watching Abernathy. Someone who knew the layout of the grounds, someone who had access to the garden. He walked back inside, his mind racing. The locked door, the garden soil, the unusual fibers, it was all starting to come together, forming a hazy picture in his mind. But he needed more pieces, more concrete evidence to solidify his theory. He returned to the study, where the forensics team was still hard at work. He watched as they carefully lifted the heavy velvet couch, preparing to vacuum underneath it. He wasn't expecting to find anything significant, just dust and maybe a few stray coins. But then, one of the technicians let out a sharp gasp. "Detective! We found something." Miller rushed over, his heart pounding in his chest. Underneath the couch, nestled amongst the dust bunnies and forgotten trinkets, lay a scattering of shattered glass. It was a watch, or what was left of it. The crystal was shattered, the hands were bent and broken, and the leather strap was torn. But it was the inscription on the back of the watch that made Miller's blood run cold. Engraved in elegant script were two initials, V.S. Victor Sinclair. His airtight alibi had just been blown to pieces. Miller stared at the shattered remains of the watch, a grim satisfaction washing over him. He had a feeling about Sinclair, and this confirmed it. The man was lying. But why? And how did the watch end up under the couch? He carefully picked up one of the larger shards of glass, examining it closely. It was an expensive watch, that much was clear. The craftsmanship was exquisite, even in its broken state. He could make out the faint markings of a luxury brand. This wasn't just any watch, it was a statement piece, something that a man like Victor Sinclair would wear to impress. "Sarah," Miller called out, "I need you to run the serial number on this watch. See if you can track down where it was purchased." Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Already on it, detective." Miller turned his attention back to the watch. The engraving, V.S., was partially obscured by a dark stain. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. It looked like blood. "Johnson," he barked, "seal off the study. Nobody goes in or out. I want every inch of this room searched again, this time with a fine-tooth comb. I want to know how that watch ended up under the couch, and I want to know if there's any more blood." Johnson saluted and hurried to carry out his orders. Miller knelt down beside the couch, carefully examining the area around the shattered glass. He noticed a faint drag mark on the rug, as if something heavy had been pulled across it. And there were more of those unusual fibers, the ones Sarah had found earlier. He took a deep breath, trying to piece together what had happened. Had Sinclair confronted Abernathy in the study? Had there been a struggle? Had the watch been broken during the fight? And if so, how did Sinclair manage to lock the door from the inside and escape without leaving any other trace? He stood up, his back aching from hours of crouching and bending. He needed to get back to Sinclair, to confront him with this new evidence. He had a feeling that Sinclair's carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. He glanced one last time at the shattered watch, lying forlornly under the couch. It was a small piece of evidence, but it spoke volumes. It was a testament to Sinclair's deception, to his cold-bloodedness, to his willingness to do anything to get what he wanted. And it was the key to unlocking the truth behind Richard Abernathy's murder. The game was afoot, and Miller was ready to play. Miller found Sinclair back at the Crimson Club, nursing a glass of scotch at the bar. He looked relaxed, almost smug, as if he had gotten away with something. The sight of him infuriated Miller. He approached Sinclair, his face grim. "Mr. Sinclair," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "we need to have another conversation. Down at the station." Sinclair's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Detective," he said, his voice smooth as ever, "I've already told you everything I know. I was here all night." "That's not what the evidence says, Mr. Sinclair. We found something at Abernathy Manor. Something that belongs to you." Sinclair's composure finally cracked. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. I I don't know what you're talking about. A shattered watch, Mr. Sinclair. An expensive watch, engraved with your initials. We found it under the couch in Abernathy's study. And the engraving, it was partially obscured by blood. Sinclair paled visibly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I'm placing you under arrest, Mr. Sinclair, for the murder of Richard Abernathy. You have the right to remain silent. As Miller read Sinclair his rights, he noticed a bead of sweat trickling down Sinclair's forehead. His hands were trembling, and his carefully coiffed hair was slightly askew. The image of the confident, impeccably dressed businessman was gone, replaced by a frightened, desperate man. The other patrons of the Crimson Club watched in stunned silence as Miller led Sinclair away in handcuffs. The clatter of chips and the murmur of conversation ceased. All eyes were on Sinclair, the man who had seemed so invincible just moments before. As they walked out of the club, Sinclair finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't kill him, he said. I swear, detective, I didn't kill him. Someone framed me. Miller didn't respond. He had heard it all before. Every killer claimed they were innocent, every killer had an excuse. He knew that Sinclair was lying, but he needed to prove it, to find the evidence that would put him behind bars for good. The shattered watch was a start, but it wasn't enough. He needed more. And he wasn't going to stop until he found it. The truth, he knew, was always hidden somewhere, waiting to be uncovered. As Sinclair sat in the interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting unflattering shadows on his face, he maintained his innocence. He insisted that he had been framed, that someone was trying to set him up. He repeated his alibi, claiming that he had been at the Crimson Club all night, playing poker. Detective, I swear, I didn't kill Richard, he pleaded, his voice hoarse. I know it looks bad, but I wouldn't do something like that. Richard was like a father to me. Miller leaned forward, his eyes boring into Sinclair's. A father figure who you were reportedly feuding with, Mr. Sinclair. A father figure who stood in the way of you taking over the company. Sinclair flinched. Those were just rumors, detective. Business disagreements, nothing more. Richard and I were close. We had our differences, but we always worked things out. Then how do you explain the watch, Mr. Sinclair? The watch with your initials, found at the scene of the crime. The watch that was covered in blood. Sinclair shook his head, his eyes filled with desperation. I don't know. Maybe someone stole my watch. Maybe they planted it there to make me look guilty. I have enemies, detective. People who would love to see me go down. Like who, Mr. Sinclair? Who would want to frame you for murder? Sinclair hesitated, his gaze shifting nervously. I can't say. It would put them in danger. Miller scoffed. So you're protecting the people who are framing you for murder? That doesn't make any sense, Mr. Sinclair. He paused, deciding to change tactics. Tell me about your relationship with Richard Abernathy, Mr. Sinclair. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. As Sinclair began to recount his relationship with Abernathy, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he was only telling half the story. He decided to dig deeper, to delve into the past, to uncover the secrets that Sinclair was so desperately trying to hide. He called Johnson into the interrogation room. Johnson, he said, I want you to pull up everything we have on Richard Abernathy and Victor Sinclair. Every financial record, every business transaction, every phone call. I want to know everything about their relationship, every deal they made, every argument they had. I want to know what was really going on between those two men. Miller knew that the truth was out there, buried beneath layers of lies and deception. He just needed to find it. And he wouldn't rest until he did. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The air in Abernathy's study crackled with tension. The elegant bookshelves and expensive artwork seemed to shrink under the weight of the argument raging between Abernathy and Sinclair. Abernathy, his face flushed with anger, slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, rattling the crystal decanter of scotch. "You lost how much?" he roared, his voice booming through the room. Sinclair, usually so composed, stood rigid, his jaw tight. "It was a calculated risk, Richard," he said, his voice strained. "The deal was supposed to be a sure thing." "I swear." "A calculated risk? You gambled away millions of my dollars on a harebrained scheme that was doomed from the start." Abernathy advanced on Sinclair, his eyes blazing. "You think you can just throw away my money like that? You think you're invincible?" "I can fix this, Richard," Sinclair pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. "Just give me another chance. I know I can get it back." "Another chance? You've had too many chances, Victor. I brought you into this business, I mentored you, I trusted you. And this is how you repay me? By lining your own pockets and squandering my fortune?" Sinclair's face darkened. The mask of composure slipped, revealing the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I've earned my place here, Richard," he snarled. "I've worked harder than anyone to make this company successful. And I deserve to be rewarded." "Rewarded? You deserve to be fired. Get out of my sight, Victor. I don't want to see your face again." Abernathy turned his back on Sinclair, dismissing him. Sinclair stood frozen for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes narrowed, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. His carefully cultivated image of a polished businessman was gone, replaced by the raw, unbridled rage of a man pushed to the breaking point. "You'll regret this, Richard," Sinclair hissed, his voice barely audible. "You'll regret underestimating me." He stormed out of the study, slamming the door behind him, leaving Abernathy alone in the silence, unaware of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. While Sinclair continued to spin his tale of innocence in the interrogation room, Miller tasked Johnson with verifying his alibi. Johnson, ever the reliable officer, returned several hours later, his face grim. "Detective," he said, "I interviewed all the players at Sinclair's poker game. Most of them confirmed that he was there all night." But what?" Miller pressed, his patience wearing thin. "Several of the players mentioned that Sinclair left the table briefly, sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. They couldn't remember exactly when, or for how long. But they all agreed that he was gone for at least 15 or 20 minutes. Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. 20 minutes. That was all the time Sinclair needed to slip away from the Crimson Club, drive to Abernathy Manor, commit the murder, and return to the game, his alibi seemingly intact. "Did anyone see where he went?" Miller asked. Johnson shook his head. "No, detective. They just assumed he went to the restroom or stepped outside for a cigarette. Nobody paid much attention." "Damn it," Miller muttered. He needed something more concrete, something that would place Sinclair at the scene of the crime. The shattered watch was a good start, but it wasn't enough to convict him. He needed irrefutable proof. He walked back into the interrogation room, his eyes narrowed. Sinclair sat slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate and afraid. "We spoke to the other players at the poker game, Mr. Sinclair," Miller said, his voice cold and hard. "They confirmed that you were there. But they also said that you left the table for a while, sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. Sinclair's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Where were you, Mr. Sinclair?" Miller pressed. "Where did you go during those 20 minutes?" Sinclair swallowed hard, his hands trembling. I told you, detective. I was at the Crimson Club all night. I didn't leave the table." "Don't lie to me, Mr. Sinclair," Miller said, his voice rising. "We know you were at Abernathy Manor. We found your watch there. And now we know that you had the opportunity to commit the murder. It's all starting to fall into place, Mr. Sinclair. The only question is, are you going to confess, or are you going to make this even harder on yourself? The pressure was mounting, and Miller could see that Sinclair was starting to crack. He just needed one more push, one more piece of evidence, to break him completely. Sinclair's carefully constructed facade was crumbling before Miller's eyes. The confident businessman, the smooth talker, was gone, replaced by a man on the verge of panic. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he ran them through his perfectly coiffed hair, dislodging several strands. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and his eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. I don't know what to say, detective, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I swear, I didn't kill Richard. I don't know how my watch ended up there. Then tell me what happened, Mr. Sinclair, Miller pressed, his voice relentless. Tell me the truth, and maybe, just maybe, I'll believe you. Sinclair hesitated, his face contorted in a mixture of fear and desperation. He knew that he was trapped, that the evidence was piling up against him, and that his carefully crafted lies were starting to unravel. All right, detective, he said, his voice trembling. I was at Abernathy's house that night. But I didn't kill him. Miller leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Go on, Mr. Sinclair. Tell me everything. Sinclair took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for the plunge. I went to see Richard that night, he said. We had a fight, a big one. About the business. He was going to fire me, ruin me. I begged him not to, but he wouldn't listen. So you killed him? Miller asked, his voice flat. No. I swear, I didn't kill him. We argued, we pushed each other. I might have shoved him a little, but I didn't kill him. Then I left. I was angry, upset. I went back to the Crimson Club. I don't know what happened after that. Miller studied Sinclair's face, searching for any sign of deception. He could tell that Sinclair was holding back, that he wasn't telling the whole truth. But he was getting closer. So you admit that you were at the scene of the crime, Mr. Sinclair, Miller said. You admit that you had a fight with Abernathy. And you admit that you left him there, alone. That doesn't look good for you, Mr. Sinclair. I know, detective, Sinclair said, his voice pleading. But I didn't kill him. I swear, I didn't. Someone else must have done it. Miller knew that Sinclair was still lying, that he was trying to minimize his involvement. But he also knew that he was getting closer to the truth. He just needed one more piece of evidence, one more slip-up, to break Sinclair completely. And he had a feeling that that moment was coming soon. Miller knew he was close. He could feel it in the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Sinclair was teetering on the edge, ready to confess, but something was holding him back. Fear? Guilt? Miller didn't know, but he wasn't going to let him off the hook. You were there, Mr. Sinclair, Miller said, his voice low and steady. You had a motive, you had the opportunity, and we found your watch at the scene of the crime. It's time to tell the truth. What really happened that night? Sinclair closed his eyes, his face contorted in agony. He took a deep breath, his chest heaving. All right, detective, he said, his voice barely audible. I'll tell you everything. But you have to promise me something. I can't promise you anything, Mr. Sinclair, Miller said. But if you tell me the truth, it will be taken into consideration. Sinclair nodded slowly, his eyes still closed. After the argument, he began, his voice trembling, I was furious. I couldn't believe that Richard was going to fire me, ruin everything I had worked for. I went back to the Crimson Club, but I couldn't concentrate on the game. I kept thinking about what Richard had said, about how he was going to destroy me. He paused, taking another deep breath. I had too much to drink, he continued. I wasn't thinking straight. I decided to go back to Abernathy Manor, to talk to Richard one last time. I just wanted to reason with him, to convince him to change his mind. So you went back to Abernathy's house to talk? Miller asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Is that what you're telling me? Sinclair nodded, his eyes still closed. Yes, detective. That's all. I just wanted to talk. And what happened when you got there, Mr. Sinclair? Miller pressed. Did you just sit down and have a civilized conversation? Or did things escalate? Sinclair hesitated, his face contorted in pain. We argued again, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It got heated. We were yelling, pushing each other. I didn't mean for it to happen, detective. I swear, I didn't. Didn't mean for what to happen, Mr. Sinclair? Miller asked, his voice relentless. Didn't mean to kill him? Is that what you're trying to say? Sinclair remained silent, his eyes still closed, his face a mask of agony. He was so close to confessing, but he just couldn't bring himself to say the words. Miller knew that he needed to push him further, to break down the last remaining barriers, to force him to confront the truth. The missing piece, Miller realized, involved the watch and how it broke. Miller replayed Sinclair's hesitant admission in his mind. A shove, an argument, it didn't explain the shattered watch. The way the glass had fragmented, the angle of the breaks, suggested a violent impact. The watch hadn't simply fallen off, it had been ripped off, broken during a struggle. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Johnson, he barked, startling Sinclair. Get Sarah back here. I need her to examine the watch again. I want her to focus on the clasp, the point where it connected to the strap. I need to know how it broke. Johnson nodded and hurried out of the room. Miller turned back to Sinclair, his eyes narrowed. You said you shoved Abernathy, Mr. Sinclair. Is that how the watch broke? Did you rip it off his wrist during the fight? Sinclair paled, his eyes widening in panic. No. I swear, detective, I didn't rip off his watch. I don't know how it broke. Miller didn't believe him. He knew that Sinclair was hiding something, that he was still trying to downplay his involvement. He needed to find the missing piece, the piece that would connect Sinclair to the murder beyond any reasonable doubt. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, her eyes bright with anticipation. What have you got for me, detective? She asked, her voice eager. Miller pointed to the bag containing the shattered watch. I need you to examine the clasp, Sarah. I think it's the key to figuring out what really happened that night. I want to know how it broke, and I want to know if there's any trace evidence on it. Sarah carefully opened the bag and examined the shattered remains of the watch. She spent several minutes examining the clasp under a powerful magnifying glass, her brow furrowed in concentration. Miller watched her, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew that this was it, the moment of truth. After what seemed like an eternity, Sarah looked up, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Detective, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I found something. What is it? Miller pressed, his voice barely audible. The clasp is broken, as you suspected, Sarah said. It looks like it was snapped off with a lot of force. And, she paused for dramatic effect, I found a tiny piece of the clasp missing. It's very small, almost microscopic. Where do you think it went? Miller asked, his mind racing. I don't know, Sarah said. But I have a hunch. Remember those fibers I found on the rug, the ones that didn't match anything in the room? Miller nodded, his eyes widening. I think that missing piece of the clasp might be embedded in the rug, Sarah said. It's worth a shot. Miller didn't hesitate. He grabbed Johnson and a team of technicians and raced back to Abernathy Manor. He found the forensics team still meticulously searching the study, vacuuming every inch of the room. Stop everything. Miller barked, his voice echoing through the room. I need you to focus on the rug, the area around where we found the shattered watch. I need you to search it inch by inch. I'm looking for a tiny piece of metal, a piece of the watch clasp. The technicians worked tirelessly, their eyes glued to the expensive rug, their hands carefully sifting through the thick fibers. Hours passed, and Miller's hope began to dwindle. He was starting to think that Sarah's hunch was wrong, that the missing piece of the clasp was lost forever. But then, just as he was about to call off the search, one of the technicians let out a shout. "Detective! I found something!" Miller rushed over, his heart pounding in his chest. The technician held up a small evidence bag, inside which lay a tiny, almost microscopic piece of metal. It was a piece of the watch clasp, no larger than a grain of sand. Sarah examined the piece under a magnifying glass, her eyes widening with excitement. "It's a match," she exclaimed. "It fits perfectly with the broken clasp. And look," she pointed to a tiny speck of red on the metal, "there's blood on it." Miller felt a surge of triumph. He had it. The final piece of the puzzle. The irrefutable proof that linked Sinclair to the murder. He raced back to the interrogation room, his face grim. Sinclair sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. He looked defeated, broken. Miller slammed the evidence bag containing the piece of the watch clasp onto the table. Sinclair looked up, his eyes filled with fear. "We found it, Mr. Sinclair," Miller said, his voice cold and hard. "We found the missing piece of the watch clasp. It was embedded in Abernathy's rug. And it has his blood on it. That proves that the struggle occurred in the study, just like we thought. That proves that you were lying all along." Sinclair stared at the evidence bag, his face draining of all color. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "It's over, Mr. Sinclair," Miller said. "You're going to prison for a long time." He placed Sinclair under formal arrest for the murder of Richard Abernathy. This time, Sinclair didn't protest. He simply hung his head in defeat, the weight of his guilt finally crushing him. The shattered watch, once a symbol of his success, had become the instrument of his downfall. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The case of Richard Abernathy was closed. Victor Sinclair's alibi had been shattered, his lies exposed. He was charged with murder in the first degree, facing a life sentence. Justice had been served. Miller sat in his office, the flickering fluorescent light casting the same long shadows as always. The scent of stale coffee and desperation still hung in the air. He had solved another case, brought another killer to justice. He should have been feeling triumphant, elated. But all he felt was a dull ache, a weariness that seemed to seep into his bones. The ghosts of his unsolved cases still whispered in his ear, reminding him of his failures, of the victims he couldn't save. Solving the Abernathy case didn't erase those ghosts, it only added another layer to his burden. He thought about Sinclair, the once confident businessman reduced to a broken, defeated man. He thought about Abernathy, the ruthless tycoon who had met a violent end. He thought about all the lives that had been shattered by greed, ambition, and violence. He knew that the world was a dark and dangerous place, filled with secrets and lies. He knew that evil lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for its chance to strike. And he knew that his job was to stand against that darkness, to protect the innocent, to bring justice to the victims. He took a sip of his cold coffee, the bitter taste doing little to rouse him. He knew that there would be other cases, other killers, other lies to uncover. The fight against darkness was never